Right, hello there, and welcome back to another Agoners Gaming YouTube video here for you. Yeah, first of all, I'm going to actually start out with a bit of a shout out to a couple of other YouTube channels. I know this is not the traditional way of starting, but it's the way we're going to go. So yeah, first of all, Proxy Table Gaming. I've mentioned them before. I've obviously played them in a couple of games of Essence of War Ninth Age via Tabletop Simulator that you'll have seen me do battle report and tactical analysis videos on. But they've also been putting some of those videos, like the full length stream recordings, onto their channel. So go and check them out. I've been trying to put comments on those videos so you can find the full length one if you want to watch it, and vice versa if you've watched one of their full length ones and you'd like to see my analysis. We've got a bit of a almost coordination going on here, guys. So yeah, no, big thanks to them for doing that and for mentioning my channel on their channel and all that thing. So I definitely want to return the favour once again. I also got just found out I got lucky and won their their contest on for the UK Masters contest. Well, what the extra add-on contest. So hopefully I'll be able to go do some videos for that as well in the near future. But yeah, go and watch their videos if you don't know what I'm talking about. My name does get mentioned. The other channel I was going to mention was Paint Desk Ramblings by Madat. So he was kind enough to invite me onto his show. I did put it on my blog down there. So whenever I do things, like I try and put updates on my blog of things I'm doing related to gaming, obviously. So you can follow them on my blog and on my Twitter as well if you're that way inclined. But yeah, Paint Desk Ramblings did invite me onto his show to talk about Essence of War. So and it was a really fun chat, to be honest. So definitely something if you're someone like me who likes to put videos and podcasts and things on in the background while you're painting and modeling. Like it's a great thing to do while you're doing other things, or just sit there and listen to it and dedicate your life to it. Either way. Anyway, let's get into the video for today. So, yes, if you hadn't guessed, this is another Essence of War battle report. As I'm sure the title will have given it away. However, something very different here. Now, I mentioned on Paint Desk Scramblings, actually, the show I just mentioned, that I was going to do something a little bit different and maybe a little bit crazy. So, what my plan was, right? I've been busy painting up some Essence of War patrols for the Ninth Age, right? And as you can see here, here's a very nice photograph, hopefully. Well, I think it's a nice photograph. This is my Orcs and Goblins patrol and my Warriors of the Dark Gods patrol. As you can see, this was a specific kind of photo shoot for this. If you do want nice photos, by the way, I do put them up on a Flickr site because I find that site really nice for having high quality pictures that I can share to any other place. And I also put quite a lot of stuff on the Ninth Age forum. I've got my own thread on there, but also this is I put this stuff in the Essence of War. Well, it's called the beginners section of the forum, which is perhaps a misnomer because, as we say, Essence of War isn't just for beginners. But right now, that's where it lives on the forum, so you can find some of these photos there before. So you may well have seen this one. But yeah, I'll put some links to some of those things if you want to follow my painting any more than already do. But yeah, so what I'd done, so I'd painted up these models, right? But here's the problem. We're in a pandemic situation right now in the UK still, and there's still a lockdown and things like that. So I can't really have anyone still after a year. Like this, I really can't have a game, like a normal game on the tabletop with someone. So I came up with this idea of like, what if I tried to play via messages and screenshots and maybe even videos and things, and actually let friends play with me remotely like that. But I immediately thought, well, hang on, if I was playing on the table, right, it would be a huge advantage to the person actually at the table versus whoever's like trying to play remotely. Um, so what I did, I actually got a couple of got a few different friends and asked them, you know, are you interested in doing this? And yeah, it took a little while for them to respond, but eventually, yeah, I had a few friends that were quite keen on giving this a go. So this is what we did. So this is how come we've got a real life battle report, but it wasn't so much played at a tabletop. It was played via messages and me taking photographs and even doing videos, things like that. I'll explain some of that as we go along. But what I did, but obviously this allowed me to spend a bit of time and take some quite nice photographs and things like that. And you know take a time over it. So it's played over a number of days basically. And yeah, this isn't obviously going to be every single photo I took because I took like gazillions to show the players what was happening, and if they asked me for like, can you show me this angle or whatever, like I was sending them whatever they wanted. So yeah, but this is like my pick of a selection of photos from the battle. So we'll talk about the Essence of War patrols as we normally do. We've talked a little bit about the Orcs before. Neither of these patrols is completely new to you if you've watched my other videos. But yeah, quickly run down Orcs and Goblins list. Big block of Orcs, Orc infantry, reasonable fighters but not great, but there are a lot of them. Fairly like, oh, sorry, well, another big block of goblins, really. I suppose not as big relative to somehow you get really big units of goblins in some of these games. But yeah, 20 orcs, 20 goblins. The goblins do have bows, even though they're arranged in a kind of normal sort of infantry fighting formation, but they can shoot with those bows as well. And they also have a small unit of goblin raiders, who are these very the lightest of light cavalry, I guess. They're very, very weak, but they are very fast. And they have an orc shaman who's in command of them all. He is a general, and he gives a big discipline boost to all of these units. It's absolutely critical. His generalship, very important for this patrol. And he comes with two spells, the Fireball and the Awaken the Beast. As you can probably guess what a Fireball does, Awaken the Beast gives a power-up, but basically it's a combat melee buff to one of your units. And this is the cards ripped straight from from Tabletop Simulator. This is from Pateo's Veil of the Ages stuff. So similar, we just went through these, but yeah, just another look at them basically in nice colour pictures. And the Warriors of the Dark Gods Patrol, another one we've talked about. A small list only has melee troops, but they are very good at what they do. Very high skills. Small unit, 8 warriors. Even smaller unit of 4 fallen, and an even smaller unit of only 3 warrior knights. But they're all really highly armored. Armor 3 across the board minimum. Armor 5 on the knights, even like highest armor you pretty much see in Essence of War. Strength 6 attacks, strength 4 attacks, strength 5 attacks, and lots of attacks as well. Nothing to be sniffed at here. And they also have a sorcerer who is also the general, but again, these guys, they're all like good discipline across the board, so they don't need to worry about the general at all with regards to that. Has a debuff spell to cast on the enemy. This is again debuffs the enemy unit in melee, the Rot Within, and Molten Copper, which is an odd kind of range spell, which basically gets more powerful the higher the armor of the target. So we'll see how that plays out in this battle. And then again, once again, are the cards from Tabletop Simulator. So yeah, pretty cool to look at those patrols. I won't tell you too much about it, but here is my battlefield. Yeah, so I arranged all this. I've put down some lovely little markers. Those are at the edge of the deployment zones. That's 12 inches in, and we've got the central marker. Obviously, you can see these are hills. The buildings and the rock are impassable terrain. We've got a wood over here as well. That's hindering terrain in the rules. So this offers some cover. The hills obviously can block line of sight, as can the impassable things, and stop units moving through them. The little blobs of foliage, obviously, are just there to look pretty on the photos. They aren't part of the terrain. And the rest of the board is my standard flat spray painted board with a bunch of different spray paints. And as you might notice, it matches my bases. So this is why my green base is that some people like them, some people don't. I love them, and this is the context that they're meant to be played on, is on this board. Still looking to improve this board over time, so you never know. I might change up everything. So this was the battlefield I set up. It's vaguely based on one of the example maps that we have in the current alpha version of the rulebook, but I shoved things around a little bit to kind of make it more fair. And it was also due to the sizes of terrain I had. Some of these impassable terrain I have is pretty big, but that's why I chose this like smaller rock over here. And also, some of the ones I feel it's like if you've got a lot of impassable on the map, it can make it very difficult for some of the larger patrols like Orcs and Goblins to maneuver. So I wanted to give some options there to both sides, basically, no matter how the deployment went. But yeah, so I guess onto the battle really. So we did the roll off, and the Warriors of the Dark Gods had to deploy and pick the side, deploy, and of course would get the first turn. So he chose. So I better talk. I have not talked about the players. So first of all, it was my friend Greg who was commanding the Warriors of the Dark Gods. He was the first person to respond and said, "I want to get those tasty Warriors guys." So I was like, "Okay, you've got them." I think he liked my painting on them. So thank you very much. But his painting is nothing to be messed with. If I ever see this guy's painting, he's also very very good at it. The other two guys, in fact, actually, he was the it's a story here, an aside, but yeah, he was the first guy I got into miniatures gaming and painting with. We were already kind of friends from a very, very early age, and we both kind of got into all this at the same time, at about the age of 12, I think we were. Saw someone with a White Dwarf magazine and got interested, and the rest was history, really. So yeah, it's all his fault. No, basically both of us got interested at the same time. But yeah, it definitely helped me out learning painting actually, because his mom was like really good at painting and things like that, and taught us a lot of things as well. So that was all good fun. Yeah. So Greg has taken command of the Warriors, the Dark Gods. I then got two responses from two friends who both wanted to take control of the Orcs and Goblins. I mean, they are kind of two races, I guess. So two races, two commanders. We went okay. So there was Rob, who has played some Ninth Age quick starter stuff with me in the past. So you'd have seen his name on some of my old battle reports on my blog as well, for the old Ninth Age quick starter. But he's not played Essence of War before. And the other player was Neil, who hasn't played any gaming since, well, not with me anyway, that I know of, since certainly not this kind of tabletop game, since a very, very long time ago. So probably back in like what would have been Warhammer 4th edition was when I used to play with these guys a lot. So yeah, it's going back a ways. So yes, yeah, so like the early 90s, I guess. Yeah, so to help with this, so to help them kind of get into it. Obviously, I sent them all the Essence of War rules and things like that, and also gave them some tips. So I kind of wrote out a bunch of kind of tips and gotchas. They were kind of specifically for them because I was like I when I came to this, I was kind of assuming a lot of things might work like old games from the 90s, and obviously not everything does. So it was kind of like don't assume like this is going to work how you remember it sort of thing. Some things are different, so it was kind of going through that and just giving a little bit of tactical analysis. I didn't want to like lead them too much to like, oh, you should do the X Y Z or give them any kind of guidance, but like I was very much wanted them to play this as they were, but it was kind of like just to help them, like if obviously Essence of War is a fairly good introductory rule book. It's not too massive, but people sitting down reading rules, and these guys, I mean, they've got busy. They've got like, Rob's got a family and things like that, and so yes, they were collectively known as Robneil the Terrible. So Robneil the Terrible in charge of the Orcs and Goblins. I did technically say that if they disagreed and couldn't agree on a course of action, that Rob got the veto, because I thought, well, this could go weird. So we'll just make sure we've got that. But yeah, I mean, it was obviously it was quite tricky to play via this method. So the photos I'm showing you here, obviously I sent them these photos, and as I say, a lot more. But yeah, anyway, but the onus on them was kind of like to know the rules maybe even better than you would need to on a tabletop, because you needed to know what questions to ask and things like that. So it definitely is a quite tricky, not like not the recommended way to learn the game as such, but we're making do with the situation we got and all of that. So that's hopefully it works out. So Greg won, if you like to call it that, the role for deployment. He chose to deploy like this. We'll see this more clearly on the overhead shot in a bit. But yeah, he's gone around this tower. Oh, we did have a few house rules on the impassable. We said we were measuring from the actual building itself rather than the base, because these base edges would make them like even bigger than they were if you had to keep an inch away from that. So we kind of milled it so you could potentially even scrape the base and you'd be all right. And again, with this tower, it doesn't have a base, so made it clear on that so everything worked the same. And I did have a little house rule about going onto hills as well, just because I hate it when models are just edging onto a hill that can. But anyway, it didn't become it wasn't an issue in the game. But you can see my novel solution for units part on the edge of a hill. I use these kind of clear plastic things to try and make sure they all stay level and don't fall over and break my models. But yeah, that's something I'm working on actually. I want to make more things like this to help models maneuver over terrain, because I know people talk about playing a game like the Ninth Age on with 3D terrain, like normal terrain to me, rather than using like flat terrain, which obviously makes it a little bit easier for the gaming, but it kind of looks a bit naff. So I'm not a fan of the flat terrain look at all. Like I kind of come as I mentioned on some of my things on my blog, I've kind of got back into this whole tabletop gaming thing with a real want to experience the differences that you would get from kind of like normal digital games, and part of the fun is making the terrain and trying to make it look nice and coming up with solutions like this. I've heard other people have things where they have a base with like the hill or the building or whatever underneath, like flat underneath it, so you can take off the hill when a unit's on it. But that's still, again, I don't know if that would solve it for me in the nice way, especially on a hill. And I think this kind of thing, yeah, is fairly safe actually, and I want to build some more things like this. If only I had a 3D printer, but I don't know. I don't know if 3D printers could do clear plastic these days. Anyway. But yes, anyway, Greg has arranged his warrior knights over in the corner, sorcerer here, warriors here, and the small fallen unit on the hill. So we'll talk about this in a bit. But that's them from overhead view. Look quite nice like that. And you'll see this the objective you can see him going for there. Um, and then the Orcs and Goblins chose to deploy like this. And again, we'll talk more about this. I think we've got we've got another shot from the other side. I tried to do some lighting effects. This is not like the lighting for me is a bit weird because I have to try and hold like lamps and stuff whilst holding my phone, so you won't always see it's the greatest shots. But yeah, it's hopefully a little bit better than it would be like otherwise. So there's the overhead view, which is probably the best way to actually talk about this. Um, so Greg had this sort of disadvantage of having to deploy first. This kind of all made sense to me though. I think what he did here, from my perspective, was he's kind of like got the option of hiding behind this hill a little bit if he wants to. Or certainly, as he's got the first turn though, he can move on to it. I guess it gave him some responses to whatever the Orcs and Goblins decided to counter deploy against him. So I quite like this one. And again, these guys could potentially run up behind the building if they need to hide. They're all ready to potentially hide, basically, and they're also not in a terrible position to move towards the objective, especially because his fastest unit is out wide. But they are the fastest, so they're also the one that can more easily get back into the action. Um, I asked I asked the players to talk about their deployments and why they did it. And Greg said he said he was thinking the Fallen could exactly what I thought he was going. He was saying the Fallen could potentially advance using the house as cover. That was his idea. He said the Warriors can either push up or dart to the right to use the hill as cover, and the cavalry will push up the right flank and can either come across the hill or can continue around it. Um, he said he did note that the Fallen were quite fast and so have a lot of options as to where they can go from where he's positioned them. And he said the Warriors are slow, so we didn't want to stick them too far away from the objective, because he thought it might limit their movement too much. So I think that's a very good point from Greg. They did conclude with, at the end of the day, deployment with a new force is a gamble, because yeah, he's playing a new game here, and he didn't know what I know. Greg was one that when I used to play with him back in the day, he used to think a lot about his deployments, and he used to play an Empire army. But yes, this is something a bit different for him. So I asked, so the Orcs and Goblins players deployed like this. Now they ummed and ahed about this, and a lot of discussions, as there was two of them. You can imagine it like more than multiplied the discussion factor, and they've gone for this. So I won't talk too much about all this. Well, I will. But yeah, they very very unusual deployment is what I would put this down as. They did kind of like talk about how they were sort of deliberately maybe trying to do something a little bit odd, trying to maybe confuse Greg a little bit, catch him out a little bit. But to me, it was super risky, and I'll explain why as the battle goes on. But yeah, they've gone with the Goblin block here, not in the wood, just at the edge of the wood. They've put the Goblin Raiders centrally, and the Shaman down a little bit here, and the Orcs right on the edge of the board. Now, we did discuss, as again, I was sort of giving them photos. I was showing them some like movement trays that were the same size as this Orc block and the Raiders block, and showing, right, how would movement around this building work? Could they get around the side of it? The answer was yes, they could, and I tend to deliberately position my terrain with that in mind, to not block off units from areas of the battlefield unfairly. It's a weird when you've got if this gap was like only small enough for, say, like only the Fallen could fit through it but no other unit. Like, I find that kind of thing can be a bit bit unfair. I suppose then the goblins could at least, but yeah, when you limit it like that, most of the units here are usually a 5 wide. If it's 5 wide, 25 mil, which is like roughly 5 inch gap. If you leave a roughly a 5 inch gap, then it's pretty fair that all the units in Essence of War can get through those gaps then. Whereas as soon as you make it like a bit in between that, it can be a bit. I find that can be a bit unfair sometimes on the map front. But yeah, so what would happen is they could actually get forward. Their first move would take them to just you could. It didn't really to lose any movement really, because I think 8 inches took them like right to there, and then they could do a wheel round and get outside of an inch. Although I said I did kind of try to hint that like, well, but bear in mind, you've got to think about the opponent's point movement, and like maybe you could get blocked in and you'd be forced to like charge out of that gap because there would be no valid movement. I didn't go into all these details, but yeah, it was certainly what I thought was like, again, just like Greg said with the Warriors, positioning your slow big melee unit away from the objective and away from the main battle action, especially when you've already seen the opponents deployed heavily to that flank, putting them on the opposite flank just basically means they're guaranteed to be out of the battle for a few turns. Which is yeah, a big risk, especially when you're playing Orcs and Goblins. This is your best unit by a large margin. Like putting it over here is like base putting like maybe over 50% of your power is like just be positioned on this flank, and so you're gonna have to play the first few turns of the game without them. Essentially, they're not going to be able to get whatever they do. That like they're also kind of telegraphed, and because of the way they're positioning, like Greg knows exactly what their options are because one of the things to factor in. I mean, it was saying they actually considered swapping these two. They considered sending the Wolf Riders round, and they could get round in one. I mean, one movement they could get clear of that building, which gave them a lot more flexibility. But again, the disadvantage of that is you're still slightly telegraphing what you're going to do with them if you put them down a little gap like that. Whereas I feel like Greg's kind of like, well, is he? Yeah, I mean, I guess his cavalry, but you still don't know. Are they going to move up to behind the hill? Are they going to go onto the hill? Are they going to go round the hill? Like, are they going to just swing right across the front and try and go straight towards the objective? Like, they've still got a bunch of options, even with the way he's deployed them. Whereas, like, as soon as you put a unit right on the side, especially with impassable terrain, like boxing them in like that, like it kind of gives you no options. So again, I was really, really surprised, and if I have to say, a little bit confused by the Orc Goblin deployment. They're also everyone was right on the deployment line, which made sense from Greg's point of view because obviously everything for him was trying to get forward and has to get into melee to do anything. But the sorcerer at least. Again, whereas the Orcs and Goblins, I was like, I'm not sure. I'd push everything kind of far up. Again, I didn't want to lead him, so like when they didn't really tell me where to put things, I just kind of default put them down and then said, do you want everything? They're all on the like as far forward as they can go. Is that what you want? And they said, yeah. So I asked, I did ask. I didn't get much out of Neil and Greg or Rob. Sorry, Neil and Rob. Robneil the terrible. Neil said about the deployment. He said they wanted to be as far away from Greg as we can get with our toughest unit. So they almost did this on purpose. We want to focus on one unit to make our numbers count and try and get a unit advantage and get some flanking going on. And also, he said that they putting the Goblins in the centre thought they had a wide range of targets. Presumably, he's talking about their shooting attacks there rather than like trying to get into melee. Rob's comment from the deployment was, "It's all in the dice rolls. You are using my dice, aren't you?" To which I kind of had to say, sorry, I'm going to be rolling the dice for the majority of this game. Like, you're just going to have to accept what it is. But like, some of the time I was sort of sending them videos of me rolling the dice things, so they felt like, I guess, more involved in it. So yeah, uh, I guess I could talk about. I'm going to talk about kind of things as they go along. Like I did think, right. So my thought about this thing, it wasn't like, oh, hang on, that's some nice photos. It wasn't necessarily a huge mistake, this deployment as such, right? But I did think it was super risky because it completely relied on Greg kind of not responding to it correctly, kind of cacking his pants, if you were. Like if Greg made a big mistake and just literally just moved his fallen up to try and he's got a few options though, right? I was thinking, right, well if I was Greg here and this orc block was here, I'm like, I can either like run away with my fallen and just ignore them and just keep them out of the game for longer, which is like, and then you've got at least 2, maybe 3 turns before the Orcs can actually get into anything. So that's like gives you a huge amount of options. Um, the other thing you could do is potentially just slide sideways with the Fallen and try and suck the Orcs away into fighting the Fallen. And again, just basically take the Orcs out of the game and go, right, well, I'm going to leave my Fallen here, so you have to deal with them. Because if the Orcs turn their flank, then the Fallen in their flank is a pretty good fight for the Fallen, actually. They won't, I guess they won't win it over time, but it will certainly scare the Orcs. Like, they'll be taking a panic. I mean, they'll probably take, they'll be steadfast either way, but, you know, they'll take a lot of damage and they'll take some break tests. They might fail their combat reform to be able to fight better, and you basically just take them out of the game with the Fallen was one option. So, but I thought either option was really strong from Greg. What he didn't want to do is just run forward with the Fallen, right, to fight them early, right? So but it's like as long as Greg didn't like just run in kind of blindly with the Fallen and just try and get in a fight with the Orcs head on, which would have been a very bad move. If Greg did either thing, either dances around with them, keeps them kind of here to keep the Orcs occupied, or runs away from them, like either one, then just basically takes these Orcs out of the game. Which is why I would never suggest. And I mean, I guess if you'd flip this and you put the Orcs opposite all this slot, it would still probably be a bad idea though, because the cavalry can move away from them so much more quickly. These guys are movement 4, advance 8. These are like advance 8, March 14. So it's like with a March 8 unit, they're pretty much the slowest units in the game. You can't be messing about with them. Like you can put them. Obviously, I'm not saying you have to put every single unit dead center and just run towards the objective blindly, but bear in mind they are very slow, and especially when it's your best unit, like putting them out there seemed like a huge risk to take, and if this could obviously go wrong if Greg responds to it in a sensible manner. So we will see. Well, first of all, we'll take a couple of shots. But I have to say though, they did create a very very pretty shot of the battle line that the Orcs had made. I was really happy with that one. The Warriors of the Dark God doesn't look quite as cool, I'm afraid, because they've split their forces around that tower, so you don't get a nice shot down the line. But yeah, who's that? I was about to say, who's that in the tower? So this is actually my Empire Assault style wizard. Um, so he's called Castamir Drell. Might be named after someone that these guys are familiar with from an old roleplay game we used to do. Um, but yeah, we were also alongside this. I was writing a little bit of kind of like narrative commentary in the kind of group chat we had going, and there was another friend of ours back in that group chat as well. He wasn't playing, but was just kind of following along. So to just add a bit of entertainment factor, and but the narrative was written from the perspective of this poor wizard who's happily living in his tower. And suddenly there's this battle going outside, and he's not sure what's going on. So that was all just a silly little fun thing I was doing for the photograph. So, but you know, we got some nice photos, and then I also entered this for the Cravenlands campaign on the forum because there was a thing asking for photos of hills and towers. So this was the tower I painted for the Cravenlands, and this is the hill that I just used as a shot for them. So, but you can see here the sorceress not even in view there. But yeah, we go on to the Warriors of the Dark Gods turn 1. After all that, this was like, I guess it was like a day or so sorting all that out, but we're there now. So this was Greg's movement, as you can see, rapid, all forward, all guns blazing, or all legs running at least. He's got no guns, but yeah, you can see the turn marker there. That is the turn 1. It's over the objective right now, but we'll obviously move that around if necessary. It's just to put it somewhere really like clear cut. So again, whenever I was giving photos for these guys, they'd usually have that in the shot, and it would remind them what turn it is and things like that. Because I think again, playing remotely like this, I feel like I'd very easily lose track of like what turn we were on and things like that. So that was just like a little aid. But yeah, as you can see, Greg has done one of the 2 options that if I'd have been the Orcs and I'd deployed like that, I'd have been like, oh no, like hopefully he won't do this. But no, Greg sensibly ran all the way over here, basically completely wrong foot in the very slow Orcs, because these Fallen are very quick, and he had the first turn. Orcs are really slow, and they got the second turn. So again, this is all the reasons why. I mean, if you're probably, though, even if you're deploying first, you'd really be telegraphing what you were doing with them if you put them down like that. So always a huge risk to do that with a big slow infantry unit. But yeah, runs forward. Everyone advanced at the full amount they could. The only thing, and as I say, if you could argue it was a big mistake putting the Orcs here, and it certainly is now. Greg's responded sort of in one of the few ways he had that would work really well against it. Um, the only thing I could maybe argue was potentially a mistake from Greg's point of view was that the sorcerer had been. It was quite hard to get in range and line of sight for any of his spells on the first turn. So that would have been something that maybe Greg would have wanted to consider, but I guess he wanted to play safe, and anyway, he was quite happy to potentially hide on the first turn. But what he has managed, because of the positioning of the Orcs and Goblins, right, because they put everyone on the front line rather than a few inches back, um, then he could actually get a line of sight through the middle here and is in within range for the Molten Copper spell. So it all worked out perfectly for Greg on the first turn. Did have a lot of thinking about whether to go round the hill or not. We sent a lot of I showed him a lot of pictures of like where they could get to if they went round here. It was quite interesting. He could keep out of line of sight of the archers by hiding on the corner here, but then he'd still wouldn't obviously out of line of sight of him as well, so he wouldn't be able to charge them next turn. Or he could get like a point here, which he technically would be in his line of sight, but some of them would be able to see him. And then obviously if he did a charge, he'd be into their flank in that position, which would then take them through the woods. So then it was, I guess Greg didn't really get into the flank charge discussion. He was basically thinking about, I think he basically just wanted to make sure he could get the best charge he could next turn off against them potentially. So he chose, after a lot of consideration, he did choose just to run straight onto the hill, go straight towards the goblins. In fact, I mean, all the units have pretty much gone straight towards those goblins, right? So they're looking. They said they wanted a range of options, and they've certainly got a range of opponents coming at them right here. So we went into the. There is no shooting, of course. What is the Dark Gods? But they do have a magic phase, and premature. Yeah, he got 7 dice placed for like the was it yeah. It was the biggest magic turn anyway, which was kind of like a weird one to have on turn one, especially as only one spell was even in range. So Greg had no real option, and Greg took the option of 5 dicing the Molten Copper spell. But he did have the perfect target here left open from the Orcs and Goblins players, which was the highly armored but very small. Well, not that highly armored. That's their armor 3, but like that's good. They're only resilience 3 and armor 3, and they're very small. They're actually possibly one of the best units you could possibly target with Molten Copper in the whole game. They really don't like it. And it was again I think a big mistake actually. If the Raiders had set up like a few inches back from the front line, they could have kept out of range. They could have basically made sure that Greg's first turn magic was probably going to be useless, but they didn't do that. And so yeah, but Greg did put 5 dice into it. Did roll. They did try and dispel it, but they failed to dispel it with 5 versus 4, obviously. And then Greg had to waste his excess dice. Nothing he could do on the first turn. And he did get a miscast as well, and lost access to the spell, so would only be left with a rot within after this turn. So that was a downside for Greg, but I think he was fairly okay with it, especially when we rolled all the hits and all the damage. And he got I think he got 4 hits, so it was D3 plus 1 hits. He got all the hits, killed 3 of them. And even though they had discipline 8 from their general right next to them, they did fail their panic checks. They're already down to 2, which is a really not a great situation. And they failed the panic check, and they're running towards that rock, which is super bad because if they hit that rock, they could potentially bump through it and actually ran off the board on the first turn. So this angle was also a very bad angle to be on from the Orc and Goblin player's perspective. I mean, this is exactly what I would have, and that's the other view, and that's the panic. Luckily, they didn't roll a large panic though. They did only roll a short distance. So that's the view from this turn. So again, and that's where the casualties were left behind. I mean, this to me, as much as the deployment had some kind of some ideas. I think there was some potential, like doing a riskier deployment like that. But again, relying on the opponent to kind of like play into your hands, I guess. This one, you completely played into the hands of Warriors of the Dark Gods here, because the one unit that did not want to get shot by that spell early on was this. Now, the results were very lucky, because on average, it probably only kill a couple of them. But I mean, it would cause a panic test on average, and although it's discipline 8, that's like 70 odd percent, 72% I think chance of passing it. That's still a fair chance you're going to fail it. I mean, all in all, the total amount of casualties plus the failed panic. I mean, I guess it was about a 25% chance of that all going off in that way, like very in the favour of Greg there. Um, but again, you kind of basically you'd given him that opportunity by the way they deployed, and that I think that was an outright mistake. So they were raging in the chat at the dice. I was saying it wasn't me, it wasn't my terrible rolling, guys. Well, it was. I was rolling all of this, but they were raging. I said it was the dice gods, and I said maybe they'd angered the dice gods though by allowing this to happen. You see, so it was kind of a mistake. I have to say, after this turn of movement as well, the guys did kind of realise in the group chat they were kind of like they were considering conceding already. They'd already like gone, oh no, what have we done, kind of thing. So they did kind of realise it was a bit of a bodged job to this point, given Greg's first turn as well, and they're all ready to hang it up. But I played. Rob did point out I played him at a previous game of the Ninth Age Quick Starter, which is obviously a bit different to Essence of War, but still similar. And we had a similar first turn like that, where I kind of counter deployed and completely messed his deployment up, and he had to like wheel all his units round to try and remaneuver everything, and he still managed to win the game because he got some good rolls after that. So Rob was saying, let's not give up yet because we've got ways to pull this back still, as bad as it looks right now. And to be fair, I agree with him. Like I think they're already like hugely behind. Like again, failing a panic test on the turn one is never great, but it's not a game ender. Like especially if these guys rally next turn. Which again they've got a very good chance they will because they're still within range of the general. If they'd gone off the board on turn one, then okay, all right, you're already down a unit, you're in a bad position. All right, maybe you could have argued they'd lost the game on turn one, but like at this point, I was like, okay, it's bad but not unwinnable. But yeah, very much behind, I would say at this point already. So yeah, it just goes to show, really, guys. Um, but yeah, so on to the Orcs and Goblins turn. Now, that was first of all we had a little shot of the MVP so far, which was the Warriors of the Dark Gods Sorcerer or Sorceress, if you prefer. I say they're non-binary, so they're a they to me. So that is I call them Nakota, but I think Greg gave them another name. But anyway, he was written. Oh no, Melisandre, I think he called her. In his little lore, we'll get to that in a little bit. So yeah, that's an overhead view of the Orcs and Goblins turn one. So they didn't again, no charges were declared. There was some magic, a magic phase. Actually, that's to come. You just check that out. Yeah, so we got let's get through this actually. So we'll show you on this shot was just their movement. So you can see the little markers. So what I was doing, I was using these little markers to mark their units. So that if they change their mind, and I could show them like photographs of like how about here, how about there, which is I mean similar to how like when you're playing like super carefully at ninth age anyway, that's often the way you do it. So I was doing that, and the reason the marker was at the front was because they did consider moving backwards. They didn't consider any charges because they really didn't have any. Like these guys were routing at panicking at the time. The only charge they could have made a long charge with the goblins into pretty much any of these units. We're all in just about in the. No, I don't think the warriors were. I think the fallen and the knights were in really long charge range of the goblins if they'd wanted to try it. But I mean, would you do that? No, neither would I. So sensible play. They did consider backing off. Now, here's the thing again, that if you've got a melee unit, right, I do think there's definitely some mileage, and I've used this in some of my games by deploying them far forward, and then maybe even moving forward, but then backing off because you're trying to draw the enemy towards you with a melee unit. Um, but then you can almost like wrong foot them by backing off when they're not expecting it. Um, so I kind of like the idea of backing off sometimes. It's always an option to consider, even though it's only 2 inches with one of these movement advance for Orcs and Goblins blocks. Like the backup is can be surprised. That can make the odds of like the enemy charging you very very different, and it can often get you in perhaps a better position. And again, it's just not something people always expect you to think of. So it's something to always worth consider. So I think it was good they did consider backing off with the goblins. The thing is though, if they could have just deployed them further back, and in this matchup where you kind of know the Warriors of the Dark Gods have got to run at you, I mean, they've got to everyone. Every time you play Essence War, you know you've got to have to move in towards the objective if you want to win. So there's that factor drawing every unit towards the center of the battlefield anyway. But then you look at these matchups, any of these units, right? They're going to try and run at the Goblins. The Goblins are going to try and shoot them. So there was kind of no need to put them so far forward because you weren't going to get into short range shooting like anytime soon. So, and again, if rather than considering moving 2 inches backwards, if they're simply deployed like 2 to 4 inches further back than they were, it would have been so much better for them. Like they then could have stood still and still shot at full power and been further away, that making it harder to get the charges off on them. As it is, they decided to stand still and shoot at. Well, we'll talk about the rest of the movement first of all. So they decided to stand still. The Goblin Raiders did rally, so that was good. So they just turned to face. Um, the Orcs had a think again. They could either try and go around the building, but they immediately realised they would be completely out of the game for, as I said, was the concern if they did that, and they may actually be out of the game entirely if they did that based on the way things were looking. Although I don't think so, because they would have been able to force an objective battle in like turn 3 or turn 4, no matter what, if they were gone around the building. But they eventually completely changed plans. But yeah, using the Pythagoras, they only get like it takes about 7 inches for that unit to wheel 90 degrees, and then you got about a 1 inch further forward movement. They were getting close to, they were just far enough away from the building like that, and that was like the pretty much the only movement they could do with the Orcs. And then the Shaman had to shuffle over a little bit. Again, keeping all the units within the generalship range, that's good. But I did kind of ask him, is that why you want your Shaman? Because again, I could see some things here that I didn't like with that Shaman positioning. But again, I didn't want to like put models down where I would place them and things like that. I kind of wanted these guys to say what they wanted to do, and if they didn't give me too much indication, I just kind of like dropped it and then said, "What about that?" And yeah, wait to see what they thought about it. So you can see the Shaman's moved a tiny little bit, shuffling over, getting in range and line of sight. Actually, on the Fallen was what they cared about. They wanted to be able to hit that line of sight down the edge of the building, so the Fallen and the Shaman can see each other from this position. Important to note. Um, and yeah, so then we get onto the magic phase. They got the 5 dice plays 4 card, which is a very kind of an iffy one because it's quite hard to get spells off on that card. So they thought about this and they decided to put I think it was a 2 dice, yeah, a 2 or 3 dice Awaken the Beast off first onto the Goblins. The idea, the hope was, right, that they'd roll a decent roll on that one, and then tempt Greg into dispelling it and draw off some of his dispel dice, perhaps wasting them, especially if they rolled high, and then Greg rolled 2 or 3 dice at it and rolled lower. He then wouldn't be able to, and then the idea was to help them try and get through a fireball spell against the 5 plays 4 setup of the magic dice this turn. Unfortunately, I rolled really pants for them again. It was me rolling, and they actually failed to cast it. It was on 2 dice. They failed to cast Awaken the Beast on 2 dice. I think I rolled a 1 and 2. It wasn't a good start. So then had 3 dice left to try and cast Fireball on the Fallen. And they also, I think they cast that, but it was only I rolled a 1-1-2 on 3 dice, so it was only cast on a 4, which because Greg still had 4 dispel dice was an auto dispel. At least there was no miscast though, so I did, that was the only achievement I made on the dice for them in the magic phase. And then shooting, at this point they got so angry with my dice rolling that our own Lucky Rob, who's very known for his lucky rolls, he said he wanted. We were on a video call at the time, and he said he wanted to roll the dice for himself. I was like, okay, well, I'm watching you do this in real time, so no cheating. You go for it. And he rolled like 10 dice. I think he got 4 hits at 5s, so that was pretty good on the Fallen. And then he needed 4 5s to damage, and he got none. And then tried to cheat and re-roll and all stuff. I was having none of it. So unfortunately, even Rob's lucky dice couldn't salvage the situation here. So just goes to show it is in the lap of the dice gods, really, rather than anything else. So maybe they'd angered them. So yeah, kind of unfortunate. If you'd expect with a round of shooting and potentially a fireball going off on the Fallen, you would expect to kill 1 or 2 of them there, and definitely force a panic check. Unfortunately, didn't get either. So, but again, the decision to split dice is always a risky one, and especially on a 5 versus 4 turn. Again, they were kind of playing into this like mindset of let's do something and hope our opponent makes a mistake rather than assuming our opponent's going to play this well, which I think is again it's a risky. I'm not saying it isn't always sometimes a good idea to kind of hope your opponent makes a bad play, but like I feel like the most solid way to play is always assume your opponent's going to make the good moves, and then but if you do see a mistake, then capitalize on it rather than like kind of playing for them to make a mistake because I think that's just too risky and you can never be sure how if they are or aren't. Like I mean, these guys are all new, obviously. Like, I'm not going to be too harsh on anyone. They're all discovering this game as we went along, so I don't mean to sound too harsh on anyone. But yeah, I definitely feel like the way Essence of War works, if there's a one spell you care about, like, you should probably five dice it. Yeah, you run the risk of losing the spell, like happened to Greg, but like, Greg would, I think I would take that if I was Warriors the Dark Gods player. If I can knock the Wolf Raiders down to two models and push them pretty much out the game that turn, and have a good chance of removing them from the game entirely. Like you'd take that, you'd lose the spell. It's frustrating to lose that spell, but I mean the sorcerer's not super. That's like the only really useful thing that sorcerer does is shoot that spell at the raiders. I feel like yeah, that spell does a bit of damage to the orcs or the goblins probably, but it's not really enough to scare them. So yeah, like I think that you'd be happy with that trade. And then likewise, if they could have traded like the fireball going off, killing a couple of fallen and forcing a panic test, but they were going to lose fireball, like or take some wounds or whatever. Like I would totally take that trade if I was orcs and goblins. And that's often why I tend to go with five dices, especially early in the game when there's only one spell that you care about. If you've got the opportunity, in Essence of War, because I feel like the risks of doing nothing like this is actually worse than the risk of the miscast anyway. So yeah, unfortunately, well, it was very bad luck. I mean, that's like five dice, and there was only going to be if you took those same rolls, it was going to be a one, a one, a one, a one, and a two, or something ridiculous anyway. So yeah, I mean, even so, like decision making is what I kind of focus on more than anything else. So, but yeah, you're very lucky again. For the Warriors of the Dark Gods. So we move into Warriors of the Dark Gods turn two. Oh, you can also see the wizard here has moved up on top of his tower to get a better view of the action. So that was part of the ongoing storyline. Okay, Warriors of the Dark Gods turn two. We have some charges, ladies and gentlemen. These were so this is going to be a convoluted charge phase. I'm going to talk through this one carefully because obviously this was had to be messaged every single thing, every single decision. It's interesting actually because obviously Ninth Age in Essence War and in Fantasy Battles, of course, is a very interactive turn sequence. Like just because it's your turn, like you're not doing everything. The opponent's making a lot of decisions, like even potentially rolling dice. And obviously you've got whenever they charge, you've got the decision to flee or not. The spell phase, you've got a lot of interaction there, so it's not as simple as like, okay, this is your go, like you're doing all the decisions. I just need to message this one player. I still needed to back and forth message. So this is why it took a few days to play this out because if one guy's in bed or whatever, then we're not going to be able to continue the battle at that point. But yeah, it all worked out. We did it pretty fast actually. The guys were all like really dedicated to replying pretty quick, so it all worked out very nicely. But yes, so the first charge declared was actually this one. This was the Warrior Knights into the Goblins, which they needed a 5. And after a lot of thinking about it, they decided to hold that charge. Sent me some ridiculous animated gifs of like hold the line and things like that. So thanks for that, Robneil the Terrible. Then the second charge was declared, which was the Fallen into the Goblins. But they needed a 9. Yeah, there's a D10 there. That's why I needed to put the correct dice down. And the Goblins decided to flee this one. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. So we'll show you how this all works out. So that was the flee path. So they were fleeing from the Fallen, which took them down the way of the edge of the woods. The good news, they did roll. I think they rolled about a 5 or a 6 on the flee distance, so they went a fair way. There was still a possibility that the Warrior Knights could catch them, but I think it put it up to like a 10 rather than a 5. Maybe it was a 9, I'm not sure. But because the angle obviously weren't fleeing from them, so it's not like the exact like dice plus that would be the distance because they'd go on a straight line. Well, they'd wheel, but the nearest straight line distance is what they need to catch them. Although it would take them through the woods. Now that was the only slight upside to this. If they caught them, they might kill one or two of these, might die in running through the woods. But this charge phase was about to get even more complicated because obviously we then got into the redirect rules. So obviously they were too far. This was a guaranteed failed charge now from the fallen. So Greg, so we tried the redirects. They passed the discipline check to redirect, and the two other violated targets that they could actually see and potentially get to and hit was the Orc Shaman or the Goblin Raiders, and Greg went for the Shaman because it was a bit nearer. I think they needed a 10 on this one, but still a possibility. And this one again, they decided to hold this one. Again, they kind of had to because of the situation. It's like, well, I mean, you probably again, if you look at that bump again, he was probably going to run into this impassable terrain behind him. So again, actually, the position of that Orc Shaman was really bad, especially if you were going to flee this. It's quite difficult, and I think again, playing like this remotely, it's even more difficult to think ahead. But one of the really like hard skills to learn, I think, in this game is like always thinking ahead your next couple of turns, as well as like playing in like what's the good move now. Like it's like, well, if you were gonna flee with these, if you thought this charges were gonna come off, which again, I don't blame you. It was fairly expected, I thought. I thought Greg's definitely going to declare these charges. I wasn't sure he was going to declare both, so especially the long bomb charge. But actually, when you look to that situation, because if they failed the charge, say the goblins hadn't fled, right? Let's go back to that view. The goblins don't flee. You'd expect these guys to get in on their own. They've got 6 attacks. They'll be hitting on 3s, killing on 2s. So they're probably going to kill maybe 4. So they're probably going to win combat on the charge, let's say. Even if they get a little bit unlucky, they're probably going to win combat with or at least tie combat with their charge, because they obviously the goblins have got the ranks, right? So they've got a skill. They've got at least 3. The goblins have already got 3 points, and they're probably not going to lose a rank, so they're going to have like a fixed combat score of 3, and they might even get lucky and kill a knight. You never know. But say knights one-on-one versus the goblins, the knights will win, but only a little bit, and the goblins will stay steadfast and kind of going to have to grind for a little bit. And there's a chance that if the knights get a bad roll, the goblins will suddenly beat them, right? And if the goblins ever win that combat, the knights may well lose because they will not be steadfast. They may be running. They'll be down to a discipline 7 at best, right? Um, but so that was the most likely thing, was these would make it and these would fail. But the good thing from Greg's point of view was that failed charge probably wouldn't clear them that far forward. It might bring them just in range of the orcs. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It might have kept them out of line of sight. It could have potentially moved them like a very small amount and actually got them out of line of sight of the orcs, which would have been ideal. So this failed charge here wasn't a disaster, I felt, from the Warriors of the Dark Gods point of view. So again, I don't know why they decided to flee this charge. I mean, obviously both these units fighting the goblins at once is a bit of a massacre, but again, your goblins are going to stay steadfast, definitely for one combat phase, right? And either way, right? So if you flee them, you're going to have to try and rally on a discipline 8. If they stay in the fight, you're going to lose some models, but you're also going to stick on a discipline 8 because the general's in plenty of range here. And then you know where these two units are. The Fallen would end up sticking out here, right? You've potentially got a flank charge from the Orcs or the Shaman or even the Goblin Raiders into the flank of the Fallen. You'd then get a big combat where you'd have a load of ranks and a flank and some more. Yeah, I mean, the attacks are the problem, right? Because you don't want all those attacks going on the Goblins because they are going to get absolutely mullered. But to be honest, these guys kill the Orcs almost as well as they kill the Goblins anyway. So, yeah, it wouldn't be the ideal combat you'd want, like a massive multi-way fight. You'd ideally want the Orcs taking on one of these guys on their own. Um, but like I'm gonna say, it's again a bit of the gamesmanship thing. One thing's like thinking ahead, like if you're gonna make that flee, what's gonna happen? And if you were gonna play for that flee, then you definitely didn't want to allow any other charges from these guys, or certainly not like, and this was a 9, that was a 10. There's not that much difference in the chance of them making it into either of those. So I'm going to say if you're going to flee that one, then I'm like, then you're going to have to flee this one, right? Logically to me, like I wouldn't, if I'm going to if I'm going to flee a 9 on my goblins from the Fallen, I'm definitely going to flee a 10 from the Fallen on my Shaman, which would be even worse, like a worse situation for me. So I didn't understand the logic of fleeing this and then not fleeing that. It's like I wouldn't. I mean, but again, I probably wouldn't have fled. And obviously that fight isn't amazing. The Orcs might not even make that charge because it's still a fair way away from them. Unfortunately, again, this is that problem of deploying so far off to the side again. They pretty much took themselves out of the game. If the Orcs had been started deployed here and had just swung around to like guard the flanks of the Goblins, they'd be ideally situated to protect the Goblins here and give them some support from whatever fought them. Or even countercharge or block the charge by moving forward. Like a lot of options could have been had there for a different deployment, obviously. But yeah, I think this playing ahead thing, like I would have been like, well, either I flee, I'd have fled either immediately from the Warrior Knights, or I would have fled both, but I wouldn't not have fled. Yeah, it was very strange the decision making here, and it didn't really explain to me why they did it. So I have a suspicion they may have just wanted to use the run away animated gif from Monty Python. So at least they got to use that. So there we go. Maybe that was the whole reason all along, was to put some funny gifs in the chat. But no point. Either way, that was their reaction, and that was the redirect. So they held this one. So again, this took a lot. Obviously, Greg was playing, like, reading all the rules, and I don't know if he fully thought through his options here. But I was saying, do you want to do this? And he's like, yeah, I do. Like, as soon as I gave him the option, he was like, yeah, I want that. And it made perfect sense because, like, if you're going to fail a charge anyway, like, you kind of might as well redirect and tempt another failed charge. It is one of the risky things about fleeing. You give the opponent a potential chance of redirect as well, um, which he took. And again, all the difference there is then now Woody's failed charge go towards the Shaman, and Woody's failed charge have gone towards those guys. So yeah, let's see how he rolls. Needs a 5 from the Warrior Knights, and they got a 4. So they didn't go hardly anywhere. They didn't even get off the hill. They moved about 3 inches, right? These guys rolled the 10. So they got in to the Orc Shaman and obviously have aligned like this to try and go into these on a potential pursuit. So that was really good positioning. Although it was dead easy decision making from Greg there. It was like, yep, obviously I've got to maximize. I want 3 guys fighting the Shaman. And that's a very bad news for the Shaman, right? This Orc Shaman isn't bad at fighting, but does not want 9 attacks from the Fallen coming at him because he hasn't got good defense. Only got 3 hit points, only resilience 4 and armor 1. So yeah, not super great for the Shaman there. And now you're left with the potential that if he dies, then they don't rally as well. So this whole situation is now looking really, really bad. Funnily enough, had they actually held both those, the Knights would have failed to make it, and the Fallen would have ended up in the Goblins only, which might have been a better situation, weirdly, for Warriors of the Dark Gods for Greg anyway. I don't know. Anyway, the remaining moves, Greg did march forward full 8 inches again with the Warriors, trying to get into the fight, but also now like right next to the objective, pushing forward past it and even. And the Sorcerer again is manoeuvred behind just to get a line of sight with the spells. There is a sneaky line of sight down here to the corner of this Orc unit. So trying to cast some stuff, that was his plan. And then Greg was actually more on top of this than me, though, because I was like, this is where you want your sorcerer, right? And he's like, yeah, is it in range of the spell, though? And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot that. Like, you don't just need line of sight, you need to get in range as well, because it only goes 18 inches. So, and we managed, and it was like, well, actually, I needed to shuffle it slightly differently, but like, so Greg absolutely on top of it, asking me all the exact questions that he wanted. So yeah, I could kind of tell, which is interesting, seeing the kinds of messages and the kinds of questions the players were asking. Like I could kind of tell how they were thinking, and I could tell that Greg had kind of thought ahead on a lot of these things, and I could also tell he'd like read the rules pretty carefully for some of this stuff. So the fact he was like more on top of some of the rules than I was like, wow, okay, he's really on the ball here. So some really good play. Making sure at the range and distance, thinking ahead to his magic phase, obviously. So we would go to the magic phase. The Rot Within, sorry, was the cast. He got 4 dice versus 2, and he did just put all 4 dice onto Rot Within on the Orcs, which was successful, and he couldn't be stopped because he rolled high enough that he couldn't be stopped anyway. We then went to the melee phase, and unfortunately for the Orc Shaman, he was chopped to pieces. Sabu is no more. Although this wasn't Sabu because it wasn't me playing him, so they only get my names if it's me. So yeah, the Orc Shaman unfortunately did bite it. So as you kind of would on the odds, it was like 9 attacks hitting on 3s, going first, and yeah, damaging on 4s and no armor saves. So yeah, really bad times for the Orc Shaman. Wiped him out. Even worse, the Orcs then failed their panic checks. They only had discipline 7. and ran off the board because they were actually very, very close to the board edge. Still, despite their movement round, they were still only about 5 inches off the board edge. So we didn't even see the token for rot within, but maybe we'll see it later. But yeah, and then there was a overrun here into the Goblin Raiders as well, if I remember correctly. Um, yep, I think that's how it happened. I can't remember exactly, but yes, yeah, they did do an overrun. So, um, yes, that's right. So this is what. So this was the end. Anyway, yeah, this is how Warriors of the Dark Gods turn 2 ended up with Goblins in panic, the Orcs off the board. The Raiders have only got 2 guys left. There's no general. There's no spells, and yeah, these are about to get into and these got into a fight. Yeah, these got an overrun into them. So you've got basically in turn 2 the Warriors have basically already won this, right? Because even if these rally, they got like 2 turns to get back in. The Raiders would have to win this combat, a front charge from the Fallen, for any realistic chance that the Orcs and Goblins had any chance to win this game. So to be fair, right, these guys did concede here, and like I was like, yeah, fair enough. It's all gone. It's all gone terribly wrong. But just for funsies, right? I was like, well, I'm going to play on as the Orcs and Goblins because I'm not having my Orcs and Goblins. I never go down without a fight, right? And I was like, these are my models. They're not going down without fighting it out to the bitter end because that's the way I like to roll. This is Agoners, god darn it. You know, we fight out to the last. Never give up, rise from your grave, all of that good stuff. Those are my mottos. So yeah, we played it out just for fun. So in the Orc and Goblin turn, I did successfully rally my goblins because I'm a absolute god at rolling discipline 6s, even though I can't roll discipline 8s. It seems right in this game, or 7s, but I can roll 6s. So the goblins did rally, and the Fallen did completely decimate the Goblin Raiders though, and did a post-combat reform like that. And then it was onto the Warriors of Dark Gods next turn. And they declared that charge of the Fallen into the Goblins. Because it was this point in the game, I obviously held that because if I flee off again, there's absolutely no chance whatsoever. And I'm just like, I'm just here to do what I can, guys. Like, I so wish the Goblins hadn't fled. Like, they might have. This was all whole battle. Again, this whole thing was obviously an absolute disaster, right? But like from the sort of deployment to the dice rolls, everything went against the Orcs and Goblins here. But like, had they just held that charge, like with the Goblins, there was a much better chance. And this comes down to that gamesmanship thing as well as like if you're behind, in a game and things are looking bad for you, like one way you can sometimes get back in it is to start to take some more risky plays. Like obviously it wasn't a great fight for the Goblins, no matter what. If even if one of those units got in, but if both of them got in, it was potentially really bad. But like you kind of had to play. I do find that, especially the Orcs and Goblins list, you have to play for to make a Discipline 8 Steadfast check at some point in the game, right? Because that's the kind of the way your numbers help you. If you fail that check and your unit runs in the first combat when it's steadfast, then it's kind of tough luck. Like, but again, the odds are hugely in your favor. You're going to make it, and you often like even strategically kind of have to play for that. As frustrating as it may be, there's kind of no way to like guarantee a win. Like especially where Essence of War is, it's obviously quite small. Like dice become a huge factor, and we kind of want that. I've talked about why that is for like for beginners. It always feels nice if you've got a chance of a lucky roll and a lucky win, right? Even if you're playing someone really really good. Um, but I mean, to be fair, from the Warriors of Dark Gods point of view, this was as much as much of a guaranteed win as they could have got really, because they got I guess one kind of bit of luck with the spell and the panic test, but like everything else wasn't super bad luck. I guess the Orcs running off the board here was really bad luck. But like, even if they'd been on the board, the positioning of the Fallen, once they did that overrun, they were out of arc. So they wouldn't have been able to charge anyone but the Warriors next turn, and that was a long charge. They're more likely they'd fail that than make it. So it was all a bit bad from this point of view, no matter what, and on really based, and that purely based on decision making, not dice. Basically, is the thing I'm saying. And I think I would have took some more risky plays with the Orcs and Goblins, like holding with my Goblins, even though the flee would definitely make sense in some circumstances, right? Anyway, on to the remaining of this battle, just to tell you how it all played out. The charge did go in with the Fallen. I think they needed a 6 or a 7. They did make that. Um, they did align a bit like that because I said, how do you want to do it? Because Greg had all the options here, and he wanted to leave a gap on this side. He could have left a gap on either side to potentially get these guys in next turn, but he did not want to run anyone through the woods. No, his cavalry rather. He didn't want to go through the woods, as that would make sense. He did then move around. This is a shuffling around. He wanted to move them. I did say this. The downside of this is they are in the pursuit path or flee path of the goblins, but he wasn't worried about that. He was full confidence that they were going to smash them up, but he wanted to move them into a position where they could potentially charge into that corner to corner. Well, not full cornering, but potentially charging with them next turn. These guys just backed off onto the objective. I was kind of giving him some kind of advice at this stage as well, because it was like, well, you want to make sure like you're on the objective, because the only way you could lose would be some terrible like thing where you all ran forward and messed up, and then the goblins got freaky lucky. But if you stand on the objective and keep away from that combat, like with the warriors, is a safe play. The sorcerer just went on the hill to make sure line of sight with everything, and just to look cool. So that was the Warriors of the Dark Gods turn 3. And yeah, that was getting off the rock within. Greg got another good magic phase. He got 4 dice plays 2 this time. Oh, 5 dice plays 2, sorry, this time. And put a 4 dice rock within. Unstoppable again. He rolled so high there was no chance of spell. These are my nice tokens though. I wanted to just get a photo of this. This was they're from Dragon's Lake Miniatures. This was a Kickstarter, and they're not available still. I believe Dragon's Lake are going to make an actual production shop at some point. You can buy the 3D STLs for these tokens, but they're not actually in normal commercial production yet. But I got a few on a Kickstarter, and they're pretty cool. So I painted this one up specifically for this patrol, because that's the spell they can cast, is the Rot Within, and that's from the Occultism path, I believe, in Fantasy Battles. And that's the Occultism spell token. A pretty gruesome thing it is too, with lots of blood and gore on there. So anyway, but so he's put Rot Within on these goblins, which is actually kind of bad, right? Because these Fallen have a lot of attacks, and they've reduced them now to defensive skill 1. So that was a bit of a disaster. So it's 5 plays 1s. They are now hitting on 2s, not 3s. So this combat's gone from terrible to absolutely abysmal for the goblins, thanks to that spell getting off as well. And that is what happens. The Fallen do kill 7 goblins, which is about probably around average. The goblins got one though, guys. We got one. We got a kill. So my Orcs and Goblins do not go down without a fight. As I said, they were not going to have that. I was not going to have it. Obviously lost this combat by a mile, but they're steadfast, and they passed their steadfast discipline 6 check. Yes, as I said, discipline 6s. 8s would have been even better though. Like this thing, the odds of passing a 6 obviously less than 50-50. Your odds of passing an 8, 72%. Huge difference there. But yes, the Warriors of the Dark Gods would not go down without a casualty from our brave, heroic greenskins here, Warborn Orcs and Goblins. But then onto the Orcs and Goblins turn, which again didn't really want to be fighting this one out. Rot Within was still on. There was less attacks now though. Hooray! There was only 9 attacks coming at them, not 12. But they got a pretty good roll this time. It killed another 7, so it's just constantly killing 7. Unfortunately, and they're still steadfast though. That's the amazing thing here, right? Like if you'd managed to kill 1 or 2 of these before they got into contact, right? Which odds are, especially if you'd been further back with the Goblin Archers and got another round of shooting, that would have been huge. Potentially at short range as well, if there was like a failed charge that brought them into short range shooting. And then another fireball at them, like again a whole new set of magic and a whole new set of shooting would have made the huge difference here, because they would stay steadfast for ages and might have even won the fight once you got down to only a couple of Fallen, right? So yeah, it's a shame this all happened, and I was kind of joking. It's like, if only they had some support right about now. They're staying steadfast. They're being the anvil that the goblins wanted to be, but sadly, no one else is left to support them here. So they'd have to win this fight on their own, and they did not. They did break, unfortunately, from that one, despite it still being steadfast with only 6 guys there. Yeah, so. Yeah, so that's Essence of War rules, of course. In Fantasy Battles, I don't think they would have got steadfast on this one, because that wouldn't have counted as a full rank, but that's not how we do things in Essence of War, so it's slightly different rules. I did joke with Greg here, I was like, if he wants to go for the every unit on the objective, he had to not pursue this. And actually, because these guys could instead reform, turn face towards the objective, and they could just get onto the objective area next turn. Only just. They've got March 12, of course, the Fallen. and they're exactly within the 12-inch march range, just getting within 6 inches of the objective if they didn't pursue. But he wanted the bloodthirstiness. He went for the pursuit anyway because he knew he'd going to win the game, and he wanted to just make sure. And I can't remember. I don't think he caught them actually, but the Goblins did flee off the board anyway. So he ended up running up to there. In his movement, they all shuffled round again, and in turn 4, they all just turned round and moved up a bit. The Fallen came round a little bit, but they couldn't get back in the objective scoring, and we ended it like that with the wizard watching on. These all turned to face the wizard part of the narrative. This was where Greg got to decide the narrative of what happened here. What did this Warriors Patrol want with this objective with this wizard? Was it all to do with him? Was it nothing to do with him? Were they wanting to like burn this farm down? What were they wanting to find people to convert them to the dark gods? Find out one day, maybe. We'll see. So yeah, what was I going to say about this game? That was the end of it, of course. The true end of it, as well as the fact they conceded. I mean, I do think, as we talked about, it's bad deployment, and I've said before, like one mistake can really change the battle very quickly in Essence of War, or one like big dice roll you have to make. Like as I say, if you play for like having to make a steadfast discipline 8 with Orcs and Goblins and you fail it, like yeah, there's not a lot you could do about that sometimes. Playing the game remotely though worked out really quite well. Like it was, I mean, it was quite a lot of effort from me, from my point of view. Got me a lot of exercise running around my house because I'd be, be upstairs doing something else and get a message from these guys. I want to move like this or like okay, running around. So yeah, kept me fit, and also try to get all the angles on the board to get various photographs. One thing I would say is that Essence of War is particularly good for doing this kind of thing, mainly because like it's just about the right scale. If you I could just get the entire battlefield in a shot from my camera, like if I stood up on a chair and like held it over the board, like so. I think if you're on a bigger board, this would be really hard to do. So yeah, a smaller game. I mean, it's something even smaller than Essence of War. You could play like this as well, of course. But like for me, this was like an ideal way to play it, to have slightly simpler rules. So it was easier for new guys to, or not completely new, but returning players from a dark and distant era. Like it was a bit easier for them to get into, and it was just about the right scale. And there's not too many units. There's not too many things to discuss. Like if you tried to play a skirmish game where you've got like 360 degrees of movement and like yeah, that might actually make things easier in some ways, but I also think it would make it really difficult. It's like, how exactly do you want to position every single model? Like, that's not something we have to worry about. It's just like I can show them the angle of the unit and say, how do you want it? Is that the angle you want? These are the arcs. I was using my laser pen to like show them like, okay, here's where you can see, here's where you can't see, here's the here's the flank arc of this unit, things like that. I could show them photographs of all of that stuff. So it made it pretty good for doing like that. Um, and also only a few turns made it a little bit more sensible. Yeah, I think the only thing that didn't work was having two players on a team, which I was kind of like worried about. This is why I gave them a veto rule. But like it was meant there was a lot more messages, and a lot more discussion, and it was quite confusing for me sometimes as to what exactly were they wanting to do. Was that just like were they chatting about something, or was that what they wanted to go for? And I do think two players is like actually a disadvantage anyway. They had a lot of we were joking and saying it reminded me of the ogre from Warcraft back in the day with the this way, no that way. And then Rob said it was more like the Sir Robin sketch from Monty Python Holy Grail with like, we'll kill him. No, first we'll draw the sword. Then like, we'll kill him. Now we'll have tea and biscuits. Then we'll kill him. Oh, but no biscuits. And it was like that between the two of them, like kind of bickering it out as the battle went on. Like it was very fun though. And to be fair though, it was really fun getting more people involved. So like I don't regret it at all, like doing it like that. But like if I'm going to play any more of this, I'm definitely going to keep it to a strict like one person in command of each army really. Um, I guess the only thing was that we have felt from the Essence of War balancing that the Warriors of Dark God Patrol is pretty strong, and this definitely showed that as well. But I mean, I guess it didn't really matter because they basically won the game with pretty much just one spell off and the Fallen unit by itself, which isn't realistically going to happen very often. But again, this matchup is a pretty good matchup for them, and not super great for the Orcs and Goblins. But I wouldn't say it's like a landslide. I mean, I've done a lot of like crunching on these numbers and things, and thought about how I would play this if I was Orcs and Goblins versus Warrior of the Dark Gods. And the Orcs can definitely win this. It's not like oh they have no chance to beat them and things like that. I do think that the Orcs are Orcs and Goblins. There's more Goblins than Orcs in that patrol list, but yeah, like they are a very much more difficult patrol to play. Not only are they like a little bit weaker on paper, I would say in this matchup against the Warriors list, they're also independent of that. Like they're also much more difficult to play. So the Warriors are a bit strong and pretty easy to play. The reason I say that is like both of them have to worry a little bit about panic checks, but the Orcs and Goblins have to worry a lot more about panic checks because the best discipline they get is 8, whereas the Warriors 8 across the board all the time. And again, you're much more likely to take some bad checks with that with the Orcs and Goblins. And the other thing, obviously, they have to consider, so they have to consider the position of the general very carefully all the time. So you've got a general bubble to consider, you've got panic bubbles to consider all the time. You've got like a mixed arms faction that's a little bit more hard to bring everything to bear, rather than a simple faction that's like basically no matter what you're going to have to charge at them, right? Um, I feel like again, and all the armor and all the resilience, like the Warriors are just. I mean, I think this matches the way they play in fantasy battles as well. They say people say they're a very forgiving army to play. It's hard to kind of make a big mistake with them because they're so tough and like, each individual model's so easily used. Like they just okay run forward and fight and like okay you can make mistakes with them. Don't get me wrong. It's just that like yeah, they're not as complex to play. And I think when you're playing, especially if you're a new player and you're playing like a remote battle like this, um, like I think that exacerbates that. So I do think the Orcs are much more difficult to play. The challenging the experts faction, of course, as I've always said all along. Yeah, Orcs and Goblins definitely do not get the easy end of the stick. You know, no matter what people say, they're actually one of the hardest things to harder ones to play. I think in Ninth Age overall. Certainly at the Essence of War patrols level anyway. I think, and also in this matchup, like the Orc unit, so in some matchups, the Orc unit's like the obvious like big boy on the battlefield, like it can beat most things in melee. Whereas this one, it ain't as clear cut as that. They're gonna potentially lose in melee to any of the units. They probably grind out over time better against most of the Warriors units, but yeah, one on one in one combat phase, like they're gonna lose against anything as well. So that makes it very tricky that they don't have like most powerful melee unit on the battlefield. Yeah, so anyway, I hope you enjoy this. Something very different. I've gone on far too long, but I did want to spend a bit of time, especially this video has been so late. I wanted to do this video fresh when I had this battle just played, and it would have been a lot easier to do because it would all fresh in my mind. But unfortunately, I was very ill for days this week, and I've been off work, and I've been in a terrible state. So this is the first like time I could really record this. So yeah, it's a shame, but I wanted to make sure I did it some justice. Um, Hopefully, I'll do another one like this. Maybe we'll use the same patrols again. Maybe we'll change up the battlefield. Maybe we'll have some different players who want to do it. I'm trying to paint up some more patrols as well, although it's fairly slow going, so I'm not the quickest painter and haven't got the most time to paint, but I am going to get some more going, so I promise to maybe do at least 3 more this year is my aim. So we'll see how fast I can get those done. And I'll finish on a very nice photograph of this was more just fancy photos when I was doing this. So yeah, hope that was fun for you guys. Let me know what you thought about it. If you'd like it, obviously let me know. If you think that's not a way to do things, let me know. I will probably do some more Tabletop Simulator battles as well as this. And maybe some other things as well. Obviously, give me all your feedback. That's always very good. And thank you very much for listening. Bye.